Will the Committee of Supply please come to order? This section of the Committee of Supply will now resume considerations of the estimates for the Department of Natural Resources and Northern Development. Questioning for this department will continue in a global manner. The floor is now open for questions. The member for Kiiwetinoong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to kind of continue on where we ended the day yesterday, in discussions with the fleet, the water bomber fleet for the fire suppression program, was mentioned that I don't have the exact description of the plane, but it's basically 14, I guess, units that were in place. And I was just wondering if I asked about the age of the fleet, and the minister had responded, it didn't matter what the age was as long as they're well maintained. But I think for clarification, we'd like to know the age of the fleet, please.
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the member from Kiiwetinoong. Yes, I certainly did endeavor to give you the number of planes we have and the ages of the planes, and as I said yesterday, aircraft can be deceptive sometimes in terms of the age, and it's all about the maintenance on them. So we have 3 CL-215 tankers. One was purchased in 1974. It's 48 years old. We have another one that was purchased in 1986. That makes it 36 years old. And we have a third one purchased in 1987, and it's 35 years old. We have 4 of the CL-415 tankers. They're of newer vintage. We have one from 2010 that's 12 years old. 2011, we have 2 of them, so they're 11 years old. And the last one that was purchased was 2012, and it's 10 years old.
The member for Kiiwetinoong.
Okay, so that's 7, is that correct? Or it's 14?
The Honourable Minister.
No, 7 is correct. I don't think we said 14 yesterday at all. There is 7 of them.
The member for Kiiwetinoong.
Is there any plans to update the fleet? You had mentioned 1974, 86, 87 in terms of being the older ones in the fleet. Is there a plan to purchase any upcoming to add to the fleet or replace?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Productions on these type of planes stopped in 2015, so there's been no supplier to purchase new aircraft at this point. We do have word that de Havilland is going to start production in 2029 in Calgary. We're certainly very interested in perhaps replacing aircraft, adding aircraft, whatever. Like you say, the age of the aircraft dictates you need to replace the fleet at some point. We're certainly in discussions with our partners in the other provinces and with the federal government to see what can be done for procurement of these, and you do have to order these planes much in advance. and get your orders in. So discussions are underway. We know that, forest fires with climate change, there could be more forest fires moving forward. And, we want to be prepared. We want to have the best equipment available that we can to protect our communities from fire.
The member for Kiwetinoong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the minister had mentioned about procurement, and I'm just wondering, has that process then begun for procurement of updating the fleet?
The Honourable Minister.
Yes, we've certainly had discussions internally about, about acquiring aircraft. We've also will be having discussions with the other provinces and with the feds to determine, how many we need, what the other provinces are buying, and, working out a time frame, a price line, things like that. So discussions are underway. There's been nothing, no contract signed. There's been nothing like that. It's just overall discussions. We're quite interested because, quite honestly, having a plant based in Western Canada that can build these type of planes is really good for the prairie provinces.
The member for Kiwetinoong.
So the minister mentioned that any potential updating of the fleet or purchasing of additional water bombers or replacement water bombers is time consuming in terms of ordering in advance. I'm just wondering, has the minister allocated any budget line item for replacement?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just advise the member, I'm trying to understand how purchase of an airplane works. It's really not like purchasing an automobile where you walk onto the lot and pick one up. Our understanding is that the first 28 planes that they're going to build in Calgary, starting in 2029, are already allocated to Europe. We're continuing our discussions with the company internally and with the provinces and the feds on that. In the meantime, we're certainly going to maintain these planes to Transport Canada standards so they can fly and do the job they're intended to do. Last year, we spent $2 million on the avionics. No money will be, the money is going to go into the planes to ensure that they will protect us until we can get another plane. Now, you had mentioned about budgeting for a plane. My folks here have told me that, when we place an order for an airplane next year, perhaps, we might not get it till 2032 or whatever it might be. That amount then would appear in the budget of that particular year as capital cost for the entire airplane and then be amortized over a certain amount of years. I hope that answers the question for the member.
The member for Kiiwetinoong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that clarification. And yes, I agree with the comment from yesterday about whether it's maintained. Obviously, the life expectancy gets to be a lot longer if it's maintained properly. And I'm sure in the avionics field, it's important that everything is top notch every day, regardless of the age. But the question, I guess, was to ask, and it was somewhat answered, in regards to whether or not there's going to be upgrading of the fleet, because if we're talking, for argument's sake, 13, 15 years from now, the 1974 plane is also 13 to 15 years older by that point in time, and just wondering how exactly that would play out in terms of this department's financial commitment, or if it even is in this department, or whether or not it's just maintenance and whatnot that comes out of this department. So that being said, then I do want to follow up on the question from yesterday about the contract and the contract with Babcock Canada that initially was $14.6 million, and my understanding it was then now $18.6 million a year. I'm just wondering if the minister can confirm that the $18.6 million a year is the accurate figure for that department.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm told in the budget we're looking at here, The budget for expenditures for Babcock is 17.6 million for the budget that we're talking about here now.
The member for Kiwatinuk.
So, in the beginning of the contract, was the contract then 14.6 million?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just having some problems here. The Minister for Kiwatinuk is saying 14.6 million. I'd just like to ask him where he got that number from. Has that from previous estimates? Is that a number that, like, just where did that number 14.6 came from? I told you in this year's estimates, it's 17.6 million.
The member for Kiwatinuk.
So the contract initially in 2017, 2018 was at $14.6 million, and that was also a 10-year contract. And now the minister has mentioned that now it is $17.6 million a year, and I'm just wondering what the increase is then.
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yep, I can explain that. The contract has an inflationary clause in where there'll be increases each year, like it's quite normal for contracts where they increase due to inflation. This year it's 17.6 million. So over the past few years, it's gone up by an inflationary number. That contract is based on a certain standard number of flying hours and things. Anything that we go over that would be an additional cost as well in a heavy fire season.
The member for Kiwatinuk.
Thank you. Can the minister then undertake to provide us with a breakdown of the actual cost per year of the contract, inflationary discussions aside? $3 million a year increase is pretty significant year over year, and I'm just wondering if there is additional reasons why those costs are higher, and if the minister can then break down from 2017 to 2018 up to today then the cost per year, because it was initially at $14.6 million, and now we're at 17.6, so that's $3 million in the course of the last 5 years increase in value, and I'm just wondering if there is a consistent increase. And so for the value of the 10-year contract, are we going to be looking then potentially, and I mean, we can't predict the future, but in 3 years from now, we're going to be looking at additional costs per year of $6-7 million, or for example?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the contract with Babcock started December 1st, 2018. So I'm not sure where the member is getting the previous numbers. So in the 2018-19 fiscal year, it was just a part year. It was 4.9 million is what we paid in that. And I'm sure this information is all available in public accounts. In 2019-20, it was 16.8 million. In 2021, it was 17.3 million. 21-22 it was 20.8 million. And this year's budget is 17.6 million. Now, the anomaly in there, 21-22, was a busy fire year. The planes flew more hours. That's built into the contract. That's why the price is higher. It wouldn't matter whether it was contracted out or we were flying it ourselves. We'd have higher costs due to a longer or busier fire season.
The member for Kiwatinuk.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Minister and Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to ask some more questions. I have a couple questions about forestry. The minister yesterday had mentioned the First Nations and the MOUs that were signed on First Nations. I wonder if the minister could provide us with a list of the First Nations that have signed MOUs in regards to forestry.
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it was certainly my pleasure to go up north and sign some of those MOUs in person with the First Nations. They were very welcoming, and we had a great reception on those First Nations. They were very hospitable to us. They treated us to lunch, formal ceremonies in front of the community, and it was a very, very historic occasion to be signing timber dues sharing agreements with First Nations. So we signed them with, the one time we were up there, we signed with Mosakahikan, which is Moose Lake, and Opaskwiak, OCN. We've signed in Norway House. We've signed with Chemawawan, and we've signed with Minnegozabi Anishinaabe, the Pine Creek First Nation. I'm sure I didn't pronounce that correctly, but so we signed the MOUs, and then following up with MOAs. The MOU was a memorandum of understanding. Then we followed up with the actual agreements that two-year agreements to start with as a pilot project. We certainly expect to continue that arrangement. It started back on January 1st, 2022, and will run for the next 2 years. We've offered we have offered to sign MOUs with any First Nation in Manitoba that wants to, whether or not they have forestry now or whether they're looking at forestry moving forward. These checks should be issued later this year or early 2003 for this first year. They were just signed this summer. We feel this is certainly a show of reconciliation, and the First Nations feel the same. It's not just talk; it's action, and I'm very proud that these timber dues are going back for the First Nations to do with what they want. In terms of how they use the money on the First Nation, that's entirely up to them.
The member for Kiwatnock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in regards to the MOUs, and we wrapped up estimates in the Indigenous reconciliation with the Indigenous Reconciliation Minister, and at that time there was still no consultation strategy or duty to consult with First Nations from his department, and I'm just wondering what consultation strategy or duty to consult framework was used with these MOUs.
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, the previous minister had started these discussions when this department was formed in January. And when I was fortunate enough to be named minister, I continued the discussions with chief and council in these communities. And, you know, we certainly worked with chief and council. There was really no duty to consult because this was, it's not a treaty issue. This was doing something that we felt was right in terms of reconciliation. Our government, our premier has reaffirmed that our government wants to proceed with reconciliation right through government. This is Natural Resources' way of reconciling with our First Nations who have the land where the harvest is happening. So we certainly had dialogue with the chief and council, numerous chats, visits with them, with our staff, my own visit with them, phone discussions, and finally an agreement to proceed with the MOU and then in turn with the MOAs.
Member for Kiwatinock.
I just want to see if the minister can clarify the comment about there being really no duty to consult. Could you maybe expand on that and how you feel there really was no duty to consult?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the MOUs for revenue sharing, like I say, they weren't a treaty issue, but revenue sharing was raised a number of times in consultations that were done. IRNR met with chief and councils and met with First Nations. We've heard that in discussions in the past. We felt it was the right thing to do. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we entered into, I'm saying discussions, you can say consultations with chief and council to hear what they had to say about revenue sharing, throw around numbers, come up with an agreement that works for both parties. So it was a collaborative discussion, or collaborative consultation, whatever you might want to call it. But it arrived in agreements that the First Nations were very happy with, and we were very happy to share revenues with them.
The member for Kiwatinock.
So I'm just, again, looking for some clarification on some of the responses that I'm getting here then. So then the minister feels there's no duty to consult if it's not a treaty issue, is that correct?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, we certainly realize that there's a duty to consult with our First Nations when it comes to forestry activities. whether it comes to mining activities, things like that. We have a consultation branch within our department that, is busy all the time consulting with First Nations. The difference in this is that, revenue sharing was an accommodation. It was something that, an agreement we entered into with the First Nations, coming out of the consultations. As I said before, we'd heard the fact that First Nations wanted to be independent. They wanted to have their own revenue. They didn't want to be dependent on the federal government. They wanted funds from the resources on their lands. And our government has acted to do that. And I'm proud to say that these First Nations were ecstatic with these agreements, and we have many more in the queue here that want to sign these agreements with us.
For Kiwatinuk.
So again, Mr. Chair, I'm not hearing an answer to the question then. So does the minister feel then there is only a duty to consult if it is a treaty issue?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I think the member is getting consultant discussions. It's semantics here. We work with First Nations. We look to reset relationships with First Nations in terms of resource sharing. We certainly, like I say, we're certainly very proud of what we've done and what we're going to continue to do in working with our partners. And, we certainly, I have a definition here. It says duty to consult where a proposed decision may impact on the exercise of treaty and Aboriginal rights. We've gone above and beyond here in resetting the relationships of these First Nations. So we discussed with the Chief and Council, we consulted with the Chief and Council, we sat around a table, we tossed ideas back and forth, we came up with an MOU that worked for both of us. There was no pressure to sign this MOU. We're very pleased to share our revenues with First Nations. We think it's the right thing to do. I made the statement when I was signing these with the chiefs that this has been a long time coming and it should have happened much sooner. And we feel this is a very important part of reconciliation.
The member for Kiwatinuk.
So again, for the third time now, I'm still not hearing a simple yes or no answer to a yes or no question. If the minister feels that there's no duty to consult, or the only responsible duty to consult is if it involves an treaty and Aboriginal rights, as the minister had quoted there. Because there's also, when it comes time to Indigenous First Nation communities, it's also about traditional territory. It's not so much about just, confined to the, and again, I didn't like to using the phrase yesterday, the reserve boundary. So it is a matter of entertaining and encompassing traditional territory that encompasses basically all of Manitoba. So again, does the minister feel then there is no duty to consult unless it is a treaty issue?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think to answer the member's question directly, we certainly recognize that, we certainly have a duty to consult where a proposed decision may impact on the exercise of treaty and Aboriginal rights. In these cases, we engaged with Chief and Council based on consultations in the past on revenue sharing and the fact that they wanted to share in the resources from their land. We feel that's the right thing to do. It's part of reconciliation. It's an act of reconciliation. It's a meaningful act. And again, like I say, this engagement, this discussion, this conversation with Chief and Council came as a result of consultations in the past with these First Nations.
The member for Kiiwetinoong.
Okay, so maybe I'll go about asking in a different way then. So does the minister then agree that forestry activity in fact impacts treaty and Aboriginal rights?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, certainly the member is right. We have to consult with First Nations. We do consult with First Nations in terms of forestry activities, because, it may impact First Nations, it may not, but it's certainly something that we do always consult with First Nations when it comes to forestry activities, when it comes to signing new licensing agreements with our forest products companies. Discussions are always ongoing with First Nations when it comes to forestry.
The member for Kiiwetinoong.
So again, does the minister then agree that forestry activity impacts treaty and Aboriginal rights?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the member's question, we do consult to determine the potential impacts on the exercise of treaty and Aboriginal rights. We want meaningful processes that allow us to hear from communities on the potential impacts, mitigation strategies, and where appropriate, accommodation measures.
The member for Kiiwetinoong.
So out of that very eloquent definition that the minister just gave, then again, does he agree then that forestry activity impacts treaty and Aboriginal rights, given that definition he just gave?
The Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the member's question, I would certainly agree that it can certainly affect treaty rights of First Nations, and that's why we do assessments and consult with First Nations. I mean, that's only proper, you know, talking to the people that are on the land there, that's the important thing to do in consulting with them.
The member for Kiwatnik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess we're in agreement on that. The minister says that it can, and for the record, he is saying that it can affect, forestry activity can affect, impact treaty and Aboriginal rights. So by that definition, it also falls in the category under duty to consult, because it does in fact affect traditional territory and treaty rights and Aboriginal rights. So there is in fact a duty to consult then on forestry activity, given the minister understanding that it can impact. So there is an obligated duty to consult based on the definitions given this afternoon by the minister. Would you agree?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I ask the member to just rephrase that question without all the preamble? Could you just single in on the question you want me to answer?
The member for Kiwatnik.
I've singled on it like 4 or 5 times now. The minister had mentioned that forestry activity can, in fact, impact treaty Aboriginal rights, and so by the acknowledgement that it can, then does the minister then agree that there is a duty to consult, given the definition earlier, that there is a duty to consult when it's a treaty issue?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm certainly going to say that we do assessments on every forestry proposal here in Manitoba. We see if there's any potential impacts to treaty and Aboriginal rights, and if there is, we will consult.
The member for Kiwatnik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in fact, then, in regards to the MOUs then, I mean, obviously, I think we're in agreement that forestry activity, in your definition, can. Community's definitions are it absolutely does impact treaty and Aboriginal rights. So was there a duty to consult protocol followed in regards to these MOUs?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure the member does understand that these MOUs are about the financial aspect of sharing revenues. This isn't about cutting down trees. This isn't about doing work on lands. That's all covered by consultation with when operating plans are approved for forestry companies in terms of working on traditional lands. The MOUs basically just signify the government's reconciliation and, or I guess, recognition that these fees should be shared with First Nations, and you know, consultations happen all the time in the forestry industry in terms of signing operating plans and agreements with, we have Spruce Products in Swan River, we have LP in Swan River, we have CKP in the Paw. Those companies always enter into operating plans. Consultations are ongoing on these plans, on the, it's just constant. They work together, they work with us, we consult, and any issues are ironed out before any licensing is done. But the MOUs, again, are over and above any forestry operations. They're sharing government revenues that we've collected back with the First Nations where the timber comes from.
The member for Kiwatna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, we can go back in Hansard and go over the Q&As back and forth, but I was pretty sure we heard the minister in agreement to the fact that forestry activity can impact treaty and Aboriginal rights. So ultimately, there's a definition and a clear indication that there is a duty to consult out of that. A little bit of a different question towards forestry is. Just wondering if the minister can then explain or let us know how many trees have and are expected to be planted this year.
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. We're attempting to get the information here on how many trees were proposed to be planted this year. So if I'll give the member an opportunity to ask me another question if he wants, rather than just sit here with dead air.
The member for Kiwatna.
Okay, well, I wasn't getting any answers when I was actually asking some legitimate questions earlier on also. So, but I still want to continue on with the tree. And I mean, we always talk about the tree canopy here in Winnipeg. I mean, ultimately there's the tree canopy across the whole province on a much broader scale. So the number of trees harvested from 2016 to 2020 grew when compared to the 4 years previous, 2011, 2015. And that's in the annual forestry annual report. Yet in the same time period, 12 million less trees were planted. Can the minister explain why that was the case?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So reforestation is certainly important for the environment, important for the economy moving forward. This year, I'm very proud to say that Natural Resources and Northern Development planted 1.5 million trees this spring across Manitoba, plus plus any trees planted by industry. We don't have those numbers yet, but we did plant 1.5 million.
The member for Kiwatnock.
Can the minister then undertake to find out the exact total from his ministry and otherwise?
The Honorable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would love to provide an undertaking to do that to the member, but my understanding is we won't have the numbers from industry within the required 45 days, and an undertaking has to be provided to the member that we undertake to take today. So if that makes sense to you, we can't provide the numbers because they're not going to be available until after 45 days moving forward.
The member for Kiwatnock.
So can the minister then also provide, though, then over that course of that period, the net that it's quite apparent that it's a net loss in terms of trees in the province, trees planted versus trees harvested. So can the minister then undertake then to provide us with, through his department and not through the industry side of it, the net loss? It apparently seems to me it's a net loss in terms of trees harvested versus trees planted.
The hour being 12:30 p.m., committee rise.